The 1899 University of South football team has to be the most amazing story in college football history.
The 99 Swanee team will be unrivaled. No team ever in the history of college football will ever be able to do what they did.
I'd like for every player to be able to read that story of Swanee. It's unbelievable. They've got a record nobody will ever top.
There's so many extraordinary layers on this story. You peel one back and you see another one.
It's unthinkable to imagine what they went through, what their bodies went through, and how they managed to survive it and to be as good as they were.
One of the founding myths of the University of the South is that we had this remarkable team that did remarkable things.
They are one of the most extraordinary teams in the history of college football. And everyone who cares about college football should know their story.
There is, and always will be, spirited debate as to who is the greatest college football team of all time. Many teams and storied programs can lay claim to that honor. There is one achievement, however, that is beyond debate. Which team had the most extraordinary single season in college football history? A season which will never be equaled, much less surpassed. To answer that question, we have to go back to the year 1899 and a small Episcopal college in Tennessee on the Cumberland Plateau, the University of the South, colloquially known as Sewanee. In the early 1890s, football caught on in the South because it was not only exciting, but also carried with it vestiges of war and manhood.
In the 1890s, the Civil War generation is beginning to pass from the scene. The participant generation is very concerned about transmitting to the successor generation, to the rising generation, some sense of the challenges they faced, of the obstacles they overcame, of the sacrifices that they made, and how best to inculcate that in these young people, these whippersnappers, who might not otherwise have understood how tough we had it and how beneficial that experience was for us. Well, what comes closer to the experience of combat than football?
Football became a kind of proxy experience for battlefield glory. And you were supposed to fight and be willing even to die and even willing to kill for your team, for your university.
The first college game was played in 1869, Rutgers and Princeton. Now you fast forward basically 30 years and the game went through a lot of changes.
Football at the time was really more like an English scrum rugby match. It was very little resemblance to what we call now football.
The rules were virtually non-existent. There were no practice regulations or guidelines. There were no requirements as to roster size.
There were no rules against punching, biting, kicking. It was an overall brutal game.
There was a lot of blood. There were a lot of teeth, a lot of broken noses. It was a bit of a bloodbath, especially in the trenches.
Football was just really a rough, tough game. One particular year at the turn of the century, I think there were 18 or 19 deaths. That's how bad it was.
It was to the point where it was even rumored that Congress might take some action and make it illegal to play.
The rules of the game changed because people were dying.
It was an interesting time in our country, and one area you would not have to question the gentlemen who played football in that era was their toughness. And I think it has a lot to do with their life and what they had been through and what their parents had been through at that time in our country.
By the 1890s, college football's popularity was growing nationally. The rules and look of the game, however, were quite different from modern football. Spalding's official football guide of 1899 provided the rules for college football games.
By the 1890s now, you actually have downs and distances, but you only need to get 5 yards for a first down. You don't need to get 10, but you only had 3 plays to do it.
Teams had 11 players who played both offense and defense, and there was no forward passing.
These guys never came out of the game. You had to play both ways. If you came out, you did not get the opportunity to come back in.
There were no substitutions. So the players were expected that unless they were crippled or killed on the field of play, they were to stay in because it was unmanly, it was cowardly to leave. They would have to drag you from the field.
In 1944, Ralph Black, a substitute on the 1899 team, told the Atlanta Constitution,
"In my day, if you were taken out of the game, you were considered yellow, or that you just couldn't play well, unless, of course, you got something broken. It was quite humiliating to be taken out of a game.